Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Clackamas County Board of Commissioners Policy Session on this June 14th, 2023. Administrator Gary Schmidt, you're up.
Thank you, Chair Smith. Commissioner West is on his way and will be here shortly. All other commissioners are present. The first policy session today is Luscher Farm Local Parks Master Plan, Potential Comprehensive Plan, and Zoning and Development Ordinance Amendments. Transportation and Development staff will present. Dan Johnson, Director of Transportation and Development, will kick it off. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. Chair Smith, Commissioners, we have a long-range work program for our planning department. This is one of two projects that are on there, okay? So I'm going to draw your attention to Attachment A. It is this attachment right here. It's the aerial that kind of shows, or the map, pardon me. As you are aware, Lake Oswego has a park, Luscher Farms Park. Portions of it are in the city, portions of it are outside of the city that are in unincorporated Clackamas County, to be clear. Those portions that are outside of the city are located in an exclusive farm use zone, which makes kind of a challenge for a park, okay? The city has been trying to address this issue. They have been trying to cooperate with regional governments, et cetera, to possibly do an urban growth boundary expansion to incorporate that area into the city. That wasn't overly successful. So now they've approached the county to look at the ability to do minor revisions to our code, because there are Oregon administrative rules that do allow for some park uses in those zones, okay? But to do so, we have to do some minor revisions to our code, okay? So essentially, what we are here before you today is to ask your authority, back up, let me make sure I'm clear here. So there's two actions that would take place, one of which would be we would have to amend our comprehensive plan and ZDO to explicitly allow the adoption of local parks master plans for public parks and exclusive farm use. So that's amending our codes to allow those folks to apply, okay? Then secondly, they being the city of Lake Oswego, the city of Lake Oswego would have to apply for a comprehensive plan and potentially a zone change application for a Parks District overlay. And then those actions would then facilitate and legalize the park proposal as presented before you today, and the park that's currently out there, okay? Right now, staff is scheduled to meet with the Planning Commission has met with the Planning Commission on June 12th to discuss the project. And we are here basically to get your direction to move forward with drafting amendments to the comprehensive plan, the ZDO, to facilitate this. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
So is this a request from the city of Lake Oswego?
It's a partnership with the city, yes. I would say it is a request, yep.
And we call it Luscher Farms. Do they acquire the property? Mm-hmm. Did they
I believe all the property is in city ownership, yep.
Mm-hmm. So even though it's outside their city limits and it's still considered EFU, is anybody leasing it for agricultural purposes?
Currently?
Yes.
As you can see on the map.
I saw that on the map.
Yeah, there are some agricultural purposes that the city is facilitating on there.
Okay.
I don't believe there is an intensive agriculture use on the property. Community gardens, things of that nature, but there isn't an intensive use on there currently.
Well, that's good.
I should also highlight, there have been discussions with the staff, the local CPO, the local hamlet, to inform them of actions that are going on. So there is this level of community engagement that's already occurred.
Good, and hopefully they would attend the Planning Commission meetings on this. And this is going to be quite a process going through this, a couple of hearings back and forth. We have Commissioner Paul Savas, you're up.
Yeah, so Dan, I have a series of questions getting to the same, well, not, all kind of in the same category, but I just want to just ask them one at a time. So, in rural EFU lands, I assume parks are permissible. Yes, no?
The Oregon administrative rules, as written right now, allow, if you look on the first page of the application, so it's OAR 660-034-0040 and 0035 are applicable to local parks on ag and forest lands, and they provide a pathway to get there.
Okay. So the follow-up question is, they're allowed without a zone change, so therefore what park-type activities would not be allowed? You know, can you put an amusement park, a Ferris wheel? I mean, I'm not that, none of that's proposed, but what I'm getting at is that how urban-like are, you know, there are natural parks, there are parks that are natural fits for rural areas, and then there are activities that can be really questionable about that, right?
And I'd have to ask Jennifer Hughes to join me to have some specificity on what the OAR allows and how far it allows it to go, because I'm assuming there are some parameters around that.
Thanks. Please introduce yourself.
Good morning, I'm Jennifer Hughes, I'm the planning director. So the answer is no, they can't do everything that you could conceivably do in a park, and there is intended to be a line between rural and urban, and that is one of the determinations that would have to be made as part of this master plan review that would come to the Planning Commission and to the board. So there's a list of state park allowed uses in the administrative rule. I can't quote it off the top of my head, but it is things like open play fields and trails, things like that. It explicitly excludes ball fields by definition, but you can have open play fields, but you couldn't have like a formal baseball. Now, on the city side, they can and do have official, what you would consider a ball field.
On the urbanized.
On the urbanized side,
Incorporated.
correct. So there are ball fields at Luscher Farm, but not on the county side. So there are limitations in terms of what they would be able to do. And in fact, state parks can actually do even more than local parks. So there is a set list of uses. As with everything, there's a little discretion there, and so I'm sure some of that is going to come up in looking at their master plan. But we are going to have to make a finding as a county that it doesn't violate the statewide planning goals. One of those goals is this question of urban versus rural, and so we will have to make a determination that this is a rural use. And so there's some complexity there, and we can't guarantee they'll be successful with that second stage of the process, but this is step one.
Okay, so let's just say we make these two code amendments, right, as requested. Does our relationship end there?
Our relationship where we're taking the lead ends there. Yes. At that point, the city of Lake Oswego would be an applicant like any other applicant, just like a private property owner coming in and asking for a comp plan amendment. And you would be the ultimate decider as to whether that master plan was adopted. And if the city disagreed, it'd go to LUBA, just like anybody else.
They apply for that application, a standardized process like everybody else. Yep.
So what's the nature of the public input thus far?
So depending on the level of detail, I'm going to have to ask either Karen or Burig or Joy Fields to talk to you about it. But they have attended a couple of meetings at least with leaders of the CPO and Hamlet in that area who are very interested in this application and what ultimately is approved at the park. There hasn't been formal outreach at this point because we're not at that step of the process, but the intention would be that if you authorize us to move forward, then we'll be doing normal legal notice as well as targeted outreach to the CPO/Hamlet in that area. And then ultimately the application itself would receive notice like any other application. So it goes out, it's within a half a mile on an application like that.
Okay, so.
That's even in the city, correct?
Yeah, it'd be the whole half mile of whoever, yeah.
So if there's a friction point with public or the Hamlet, whatever it may be, if there's a friction point, is it with the two code amendments or is it with what they do afterwards?
I would assume, I haven't been intimately involved in those discussions, but I'm familiar with the players that are out there. I think it's the nuance of the topic you first brought up. Is it more urban uses that are in that area, or is it more rural uses that are in this area of the park? And I think that's kind of what the tone of the discussion with the community has been. I'm not sure if you've been out there, but that area we're talking about right now is primarily agricultural in nature. And light agricultural uses. It's got community garden. They've got fields out there. You go out there and kids take their senior pictures out there. It's very open space and open grain versus the area inside the city. You go inside the city and it's like, there's ball fields, there's football, turf fields, et cetera. So I think that's kind of the tension around the discussion right now.
All right, that's all I have.
Yep.
Is that it, Paul?
Yep.
Thank you for your questions. One of your questions spurred my question. So I assume the burden of proof is on Lake Oswego to make the use for its proposed use, to make the case for its proposed use. The burden is on Lake Oswego, not Clackamas County.
That is correct. Our work.
Phase two, yes.
Yes, our work is simply allowing a path And then with these amendments, consistent with state code, and then the burden of proof for them to come forward so we can make our findings is based on the city's application.
Okay, great. Commissioner Schrader?
Yeah, I'm very familiar with this park because I bring, on the urban side, they have a dog park, they have a soccer field, they have all that. And then the other side of it, I know they won't put a pickleball court in, let's put it that way, okay? That's not, that's not going to happen anytime soon.
I would
but-
recommend they don't, but that's
me
a discussion
too,
they can
me
have.
too. Pickleball is a big deal, like Oswego. But I don't see it particularly changing from the uses they already have now. I think that what I see going on there is mostly, this is an interesting issue because I think we've had to address the urban-rural interface for a while. And they're kind of a good test case of how this can work. They really do use it for gardens, they use it for environmental education, they use it for, open space, walking, all the vegetable gardens that are there. I think it's interesting, and I think that from what I've seen of this city, that they would more than likely maintain it as more of a natural agricultural, urban farming, education, environmental education piece. So I hope we can work it out. I don't have any major concerns about changing the code, and I think it's kind of finally we grapple with some of this where it's kind of, you got the city, but they kind of really want that agricultural component there for them to access. That isn't really family farming, but it does give urban people an opportunity to garden and have all that other piece, so. Yeah, and they have a great dog park, gotta say, but that's in the.
In the city, they have a great dog park, exactly.
Park, okay, so, which I use all the time, but, okay, so thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Scholl?
Yes. Good morning, Dan and Jennifer. If the comprehensive plan of ZDO is amended to accommodate this Luscher Farms issue, is there any potential for the decision to harm planning goals in other areas? In other words, is there any potential for any negative kickback by, if we were to approve your recommendation number 1 this morning?
So I will say, I don't know how much weight this necessarily carries, but there is a 3-party intergovernmental agreement between Tualatin, Westland, and Lake Oswego about ultimate urban planning for the Stafford Triangle and some sort of triggers that will allow that to move forward. There is a carve-out for Luscher Farm, that area, so that if Lake Oswego had wanted or would in the future want to pursue that as a separate planning piece, the other 2 cities have consented to that. They were not successful trying to move that through the Metro UGB amendment process when the city of Lake Oswego tried that, but I think it does indicate that the other 2 cities in that area at least understand that this could be something different from the rest of the planning. Otherwise, I think it's probably traffic. That is one of the concerns the county or the community may have about, sort of traffic at that roundabout, and they will have to evaluate that as part of the master plan. Correct, yes. And then the other thing is, as Dan's telling me, yes, reminding me, it's important to realize that this, while the impetus for doing this was a request from Lake Oswego specific to Luscher Farm, this phase 1 is not limited to Luscher Farm. So if the city of Candy wanted to do a park at some point, or Sandy, or the county on resource lands, this same process would be available. But I think that the master planning process, because it is so intensive and requires a comp plan amendment, meaning it comes to you, that there's going to be the opportunity to evaluate these concerns on a site-specific basis.
Okay, so in the future, if we had a similar request, we'd have a hearing for that too?
That's
Okay.
correct.
All right, good.
Independent review of every request.
I understand. Thank you.
I'd like to talk about traffic for a minute. So people who live out there or within a half a mile of the notice area, or even outside the notice area, can complain about traffic. So what does the complaint about traffic need to be in order for this not to be approved, or in order to mitigate it? Let's say people complain, the change of use, oh, I'm going to have all this traffic, and I'm going to be backed up, and I won't be able to make a left turn out of my driveway, or it's going to become very dangerous for me to travel this road. How do you answer that? Or what does the applicant do about that?
Do you want me get started? You want to start? Yeah, rock, paper,
I can
scissors.
go. So there's two aspects. Dan and I have worked together for 30
long
years.
time,
so
yeah.
It's this dance that we do. There's two aspects to it. There's safety. So we rely on our transportation engineering department to look at things like sight distance at access points, crash data in the area, intersection alignment and where driveways are relative to other ones for conflicts. So that's like the safety side, and that gets looked at. Some of that is pretty clear and objective standards like sight distance, and some of it is a little more discretionary about whether something is or isn't safe. The other piece is congestion. So the county has adopted performance standards for our road network. And ultimately, we have advised the city, at least informally, that we think they're going to need to submit a traffic study. They've done some traffic analysis in the past, but it needs to be updated. And I think informally, they've acknowledged that that'll be necessary. So that's looking at how much congestion is it? Because while somebody may complain that there's a lot of traffic, we have a standard for how much traffic is permissible. And their traffic study is going to have to demonstrate that the system can handle it.
Build a little bit on that. There's also proportionality of those exactions. So basically, I mean, we look at what the use is. Is it a high trip generator, yes or no? If it's not, is it proportional to exact improvements that are related to issues that they aren't creating? I mean, and that's kind of this Nolan-Dolan analysis, is legal terms around the exaction of improvements. So if I have a use A that's doing something small that doesn't generate a lot of traffic but goes into an intersection, it's like I can't make them improve every aspect of that intersection because it's not proportional to the project.
So the applicant would have to supply a planning study to say that the change of the use will have an impact or not.
A traffic study, correct.
Okay. Let's say that it is a high-trip generator. I'm not saying it is. I don't expect it to be, but let's say some activities will be a high-trip generator. How is that mitigated?
Well, so potentially you could approve ultimately parts of the master plan and not other parts. If there's some aspect that's going to generate traffic, you could potentially say you're approved for all of this in your master plan and not the other. I mean, we could deny part of it. Otherwise, mitigation comes down to sort of what Dan was saying. If we were to say, well, you have to add an entire lane to Stafford Road, that's not really proportional. So potentially the city would either have to agree to do that, or we could potentially deny it. I mean, it's a comprehensive plan amendment, so there's no guarantee that it gets approved.
And negotiation could happen.
It happens on every project.
Yeah.
Yep.
On traffic.
Yep.
Traffic seems to be a big deal, especially like Martha was saying in the urban-rural interface, because as we're expanding outward from inner, those road improvements have not been made. Not at the county level, I'm not saying, but just in general, the state or federal. There's more impacts on our transportation. If we're going to change the use of something, that means more people are going to come, okay? And I like this project. I think it's wonderful. If Lake Oswego wants to buy a farm and do whatever they think they can do on there, I think that is fine. That's fine.
Since you're talking about traffic, let's talk about it real quick. I mean, it's important to understand the fact when a project comes in, we have pre-application conferences with them. We talk to them about, hey, you know what, what's your use, what's your traffic generation? We have internal expertise in our development engineering group that basically scopes out where that traffic analysis, what intersections they have to look at. They do that based off the size, scope, and scale of the use that's being proposed. Then, as Jennifer said, there are negotiations that occur during that process. We have to make an assertion, is a condition reasonable? Is there a reasonableness to it? Is it feasible? Is it viable? We look at our TSP. Are there projects on there that might mitigate it? Who knows? It's a dance that occurs during that development project on anything. This particular use, I don't see a large trip generator, but on those more higher trip generating projects, there's a lot of negotiations that we have to do. So
Thank
yep.
you. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, I have a couple other things. So I'm a little bit confused. I'm looking at page 10 of the 22-page packet, which is attachment B 9-2 or 9-2. And unless it's misprinted or the wrong words are being used here, I'm looking at bullet number 4, 5, and beyond. So I'll just read one of them that strikes me. The most efficient categories are neighborhood and community parks, particularly east of the Willamette River, where there are fewer than 2 park acres per 1,000. And I won't read the rest. And then further on down, on the next bullet, it also mentions east of, the east of the area. So east of the area, east of Willamette River is not Lake Oswego.
Correct. So attachment B is the existing Chapter 9 of the County Comprehensive Plan.
Okay.
And it is just candidly very, very out of date. It hasn't been amended in any significant way in decades. So if you read it, you'll be chuckling about all kinds of things. But the idea, like our population projections for like 1987 or something. So, we probably could update the population projection as part of this, but this is the chapter to show you what we have now, and we would be inserting some language in there to accommodate these master plans. It's kind of beyond the scope to fix everything, but it is the county's general comprehensive plan for parks.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that was meant to be Tualatin River, so just.
Right.
for
No,
example. Right.
we were identifying at least 20-something years ago a parks deficiency in that area east, yes.
So my second one, going back to my earlier question about, input and so forth, there is no, in this packet here, there's no mention of any complaints or public input or anything in here.
Correct.
What is the background of any complaints related to this particular park property, whatever? Are there existing complaints filed, or are there public comments filed? And if so, how do we access them?
There is an existing code enforcement complaint, which we have, under the county's enforcement policy, not been pursuing because this process is in play. And so, yes, I think it's, as I understand it, kind of a general complaint that it's not compliant with land use, which is accurate currently, and this is an attempt to try to provide a pathway to get there. The specific nature of the complaint, what I'm aware of is there's been some concern, and I don't want to make it sound like this is broad. We're not hearing from dozens of people by any stretch, but there has been some concern about the events that they're holding there. So it's things like fun runs and, those kinds of community-type events. And I think that is going to be one of the questions that's going to have to be looked at in this master planning process as to what degree those can be authorized. But that's primarily what I've heard about, is the concern about that, more so than like the basic farming and walking and all the things we've been talking about.
And I want to emphasize again what Jennifer said earlier. Once you give us the authority to move forward and advance these amendments, that's when that targeted notice will go out. That's that collection process to collect all the community comments regarding it. And we'll get those, and those will be provided to the board as well.
Right. Well, in Chair Smith's comments about traffic and all that, I'm just wondering, certain events do draw a lot of people, right? So has there been a traffic study, or is that to come?
To come.
Okay, is that in phase two?
So again, if you recall, this is step one, which makes the pathway, the ability to do it. Then in phase two, as you said, basically when they apply, the discussion will be, is a traffic study needed for the uses they're proposing? And if it is, they will have to submit it like any other applicant would. Yep.
Right, okay.
Thank you.
That's what I have, Chair.
Just a quick comment with the traffic piece. I'd be more worried about the I-205 issue with.
The what?
With diversion than I would be about increased traffic, given I don't see this fundamentally changing what's already going on there now. Maybe it would, but, we already are getting traffic from the park. I worry more about the I-205 polling, and that's a diversion area up through that McVeigh.
The current uses that are there, I don't believe to be high traffic
No,
outside of the
no.
city. Make sure we're
Right.
clear about that.
No, outside of the city, at least anecdotally, with me being there pretty frequently, it doesn't appear to be that. But I do think with the tolling piece is when you're going to see an impact there. But that's just, like I said, that's just me knowing the area, knowing the park, seeing what happens there, so.
How many acres is Luscher Farms?
There are many different properties involved in it, and so
You have to come to the table if you're going to speak, please.
I don't think we know exactly.
We'll get that information back to you. Because I know you're looking for just the out area, the totality of the park site, correct?
Totality of the entire Luscher Farms that Lake Oswego acquired, and then how many acres are left in the agricultural rural area?
No, unincorporated area.
Yeah,
Yep.
the
We can forward that
unincorporated.
information to you.
Yeah, yeah. As it looks at the map, it looks like it could be considerable. Yeah.
There's a winery across the street from it, I think.
A winery?
I can't remember.
Good use.
And then
Good use of
there's- then
agricultural
there's a-
land.
Then there's a huge family farm.
Yeah.
Fiala Farms, yeah.
Commissioner West, you're up.
Thank you, Chair. So just trying to catch my own self up, because some of this predates me. So you guys are trying to do some long-range planning in this area specifically, right? So there's some zoning changes that have to happen, or some comprehensive plan changes, and so we're starting on that pathway. Am I understanding that correctly?
We have been requested by the city to amend our code to comply with state statute that allows these type of uses. That is correct.
Okay, and so then that creates the pathway for this to happen.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. And when I look at this, to me, it looks like, I mean, this is very much an agricultural-centric area that's close to urban areas also here in the county, in that hamlet area, correct? And it looks like to me that this is being utilized for the purposes that are already maybe more open to the public, right? So these are gardens and educational opportunities and a chicken coop and things like that that would fit the usage of what's already there. This is basically creating an alignment with statute to move forward with this potential plan.
Current statute kind of limits it's ag, but it's private ag, and this is more of a public interface and a public property. And so that's kind of that adjustment that we're looking to do, is allow the capacity within our code to allow for these types of uses. And when it comes in, as Jennifer said, that there needs to be an analysis by staff. Is it rural in nature or is it urban, as Commissioner Sabas talked about? I mean, are they going to put ballparks in here? Are they going to put things like that? That relates into rural element. Are they going to keep it the way it is? That's pretty rural in nature.
Because it flips, so this, just by nature, by it, looks like in this photograph, when you read this, and little options and what's happening, just by flipping it from private to public alone triggers this whole response.
It's already been.
Even though it's the same use?
It's already, Lake Oswego, the city already owns the entirety.
And I may have
Okay.
confused the topic. When I say private, I mean more like private farm uses.
Okay.
And this is more like a public use for farm activity. So that's kind of that private-public component.
So like, so it's like going to the pumpkin patch instead of having a private farm use that has less probably wear, tear, use on roads, things like that.
It's like a city owning a pumpkin patch.
Okay.
Yeah, yep.
Okay, cool. Thank you for helping me kind of understand what the scope is here.
Yep.
Thanks.
Any more questions?
Yeah, just one more. I just want to go back to public input. I'm reading here that it says that input was received, where is it at? There was input received thus far, so, you mentioned that would come later, but there is a reference here that there is input from the city of Lake Oswego, the CPO, so forth. So can we get a copy of that?
I don't know if there's anything in writing, but the answer is yes, you can if we have it. Karen Burig and Joy Fields have had conversations with the Stafford, Hamlet, and CPO. It hasn't risen to the level, as far as I'm aware, of being formal, like taking a vote or something like that. But yes, there have been discussions because that community is very interested in what happens at Luscher Farm, yes.
And in the interest of being transparent, we thought it important to reach out to them.
Right, it doesn't say written, it just says public input received from City of Lake Oswego staff, representatives from the Hamlet and CPO and DLCD staff.
If we have any
Yes,
testimony.
we had a meeting with DLCD. I was at that, and that was more technical about what was going to be required, their understanding of what state law permitted. And then the city, we've had those same discussions. What is the pathway? So there was a lot of back and forth, kind of background and research done to get to this recommendation today.
All right, thank you.
So this Lusher Farms property is in the middle of what we affectionately term the Stafford Triangle?
Yes.
Is that right?
That's correct.
Point of clarification. Thank you very much. Commissioners, we have options for motions. I will entertain a motion on page 3.
I move to direct staff draft amendments to the comprehensive plan and ZDO to enable local parks, master plans in natural resource zoning districts.
Second.
Commissioner Scholl has moved to direct staff to draft amendments to the comprehensive plan and ZDO to enable local parks, master plans in natural resource zoning districts. Commissioner Schrader has seconded that motion. Further discussion? Tony, would you please take the poll?
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Commissioner Shull,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much,
Thank you so
Board.
much.
Thank you, staff, for coming forward.
We'll get
We look-
answers to your questions.
Yes, so we look forward to seeing you sometime in the future. Gary, we are ahead of schedule.
We are, but staff is present, so we can move forward, or we could take a break, whatever you
Let's
prefer.
take a 5-minute break, please, and then we will come back at exactly 5 minutes. Thank you. We have returned to the policy sessions on this June 14th for the Board of Clackamas County Commissioners. Gary Schmidt, what's up?
Thank you, Chair Smith. The next session is Supportive Housing Services, one-time and limited-term allocations. Adam Brown and Vahid Brown from Health, Housing, Human Services will present. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Chair Smith, Commissioners. Adam Brown, Deputy Director, Health, Housing, and Human Services.
Good morning, Chair Smith, Commissioners. Vahid Brown, Deputy Director of Housing and Community Development.
So we're here this morning seeking your approval of the plan and priorities for making one-time and limited-term investments in services and infrastructure for homelessness and housing, funded by our one-time carryover balance of Supportive Housing Services funds. We appreciate the opportunity to be here this morning and are excited about being able to partner with you and take direction from you in this unique and valuable opportunity. In terms of our agenda, we're going to spend a few minutes setting the context. Then we'll walk through the 5 priority areas for investment that we laid out in the staff report for today, and then we'll leave plenty of time for questions and discussion. So going into fiscal year 23-24, the third year of funding from the SHS measure, Health, Housing, and Human Services will have a considerable carryover balance of one-time SHS funding. This carryover balance is the result of 3 things. The first is budgeted revenue in excess of budgeted expenditures. This is the balance of funds that has accumulated as our programs are ramping up. The second is that we have revenue in excess of the budgeted amount. This is tax collections being higher than forecasted. And the third factor is that we have started budgeting forecasted revenue in the year of collections for fiscal year 23-24, as opposed to budgeting new revenue to fund programs in the year following collections. As you know, we've taken a conservative approach to budgeting SHS funds to this point as we waited for collections to materialize and become more stable and consistent. The pace of collections is starting to even out, so we have budgeted the forecasted revenue in fiscal year 23-24 to align with standard budgeting practices. Based on what I've outlined here, our total SHS budget for fiscal year 23-24 is just under $104 million. This includes new revenue for ongoing programs and services totaling $45.3 million and a carryover balance of $58.6 million for one-time and limited-term investments. The Supportive Housing Services intergovernmental agreement with Metro requires that we submit to Metro for review an annual program budget that includes a spend-down plan for the year. The spend-down plan should describe the nature and timing of planned spending, including any funds anticipated to be carried over into following fiscal years and the anticipated timeline of spending those funds. This policy session here is on that last piece, the anticipated carryover balance of $58.6 million and our proposed plan for spending those funds over the next few years as guided by your priorities. But before we go into the detail there, I want to quickly address the ongoing revenue piece. As you know, we've been working really hard over the past 18 months to grow and improve our system of care and our array of housing services programs. This includes building our own organizational infrastructure, capacity building for new and expanding community-based organizations, broadening system support and coordination, improving data collection and analysis, and executing contracts for new services that run the whole range from street outreach to permanent supportive housing, including services that Clackamas County has never had before. All of these investments are oriented towards building an ongoing level of services that can be sustained by the new revenue that we will receive each year. For fiscal year 23-24, the amount forecasted to be collected is $45.3 million, and our ongoing annualized commitments, largely service contracts, are really close to that amount. This is reflected in the increasing rate of our current year spending, and we expect that to continue into next year as our newly contracted programs and services start running at full capacity. In short, we're doing a really great job of building that ongoing base of programs and services. We always knew that actual spending would lag behind the annual programmatic commitments over the first couple of years, but we can expect actual spending to come much closer to the committed amount each year now that our programs are off the ground. But just to quickly reiterate the distinction with our ongoing funding, the carryover balance we're talking about today should not be used for ongoing programs and services, because it will create commitments that we will not be able to afford in the future. But that doesn't mean the balance has to be spent all at once. We need to establish a clear plan now, but that plan can and does include both one-time and limited-term investments. Prudent one-time investments include things like building contingencies and reserves, investments in system improvement and capacity building, and capital infrastructure. Limited-term investments are those that span multiple fiscal years and can be scaled up and down without creating future obligations or future instability for programs and program participants. They could also include pilot programs that we might choose to fund on an ongoing basis down the road when our baseline revenue amount increases. So for the carryover balance of $58.6 million, we have proposed a series of strategic one-time and limited-term investments across 5 high-level priority areas that will help grow and stabilize the homeless services system in Clackamas County to align with our long-term system goals. The priority areas are financial stability, expanding capacity, upstream investments, rent assistance, and capital needs. So now we'll go into the priority areas, and we'll leave opportunities for discussion as we go. For priority area 1, financial stability, we are planning $11.4 million to fully fund contingency and stabilization reserves. This is a little bit nuts and bolts, but it's critical for the long-term stability and financial stewardship of these programs. Both elements have terms outlined in the SHS IGA. For contingency, which is generally used to cover unanticipated program expenses, the agreement says that the account will not exceed 5% of budgeted program funds in a given fiscal year. So 5% of the budgeted $45.3 million of new revenue is $2.3 million, and that's what we've planned for here. For stabilization reserves, which are used to cover fluctuations in revenue, such as in a recession, the agreement says that the target minimum reserve level will be equal to 10% of budgeted program funds. But given the volatility of this funding source, we have recommended reserves at a higher level at 20% of the budgeted amount, which is $9.1 million. So that's our first priority area. That one's a little bit nuts and bolts, but that comes off the top. Want to give opportunity for questions.
Thank you. Thank you for that, and we're going to do priority areas as we go through and can ask questions. And commissioners, if you don't remember your questions, we'll go back again. My question is this, on the financial stability portion, to fund contingencies and reserves, you say we're doing it at a higher rate than recommended because of the uncertainty, and I really appreciate that, and that's clear direction from this board. But are we allowed to continue to hold those reserves past the expiration date of this measure when the tax ends?
Yeah, so I would need to get you a more formal response, but we've talked about this a little bit in principle as a financial review team and in our program planning, that once the measure ends, actually we expect collections to come in well after the measure ends, right, from prior periods. And so there's thought that, even if the measure does sunset in 8 years now, that there will be money sort of available after that date that can continue to be spent on the programs and services.
Because, I sit on the planning bodies, both the planning bodies for this organization, and there's always comment from outside sources. We're not spending the money fast enough, and there's some outside sources who say we should not be saving any money for the future, that we need to spend it as fast as we get it coming in. And sometimes there's a public perception created that we're holding on to monies and not spending them. And my point is this, we are not. We're being financial wise stewards of the taxpayers' money. We're saving it for a rainy day in case we have a program created or something created and the revenues stop coming in. I think that's a very important point that we think about in going forward. And you say you raised your contingencies to, did I hear, to 20%?
Yeah, 20% of the forecasted new revenue amount. So that's
Forecasted new revenue
yeah,
amount.
so 9.1 million is 20% of the 45.3 million.
And that's allowed for in the measure, in the
Yes.
law.
Yep.
Okay.
And I suspect, Chair, that we'll see the tri-counties sort of come along in this regard. We're a little bit ahead in articulating what we're going to do here to address this. But I think it's likely that the financial review team, which is basically the CFOs from each of the counties that sit on the financial committee, that I suspect they'll even look at this over time as well.
It may, just a point of interest, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, it may be more difficult for the other two counties to establish their large reserve accounts because in the beginning they borrowed money, and those monies have to be repaid.
I don't know of either jurisdiction borrowing money. Do you?
No, I mean, I think they borrowed against their own contingencies.
That's what I mean, but you
Yeah.
have to pay back your own county contingencies, so therefore, that money would have to go first instead of going into their own reserve account, is what I'm saying. Instead of the reserve account for this fund, you would have to pay back your own contingencies and reserves first.
Sure.
Okay, Commissioner Schrader?
Yeah, I want to thank you for this, because I think this is a really good plan and a really good model, and it part of the issue I think we're dealing with is that I remember that people want you to move quickly, but you can't move quickly unless you have a strategy and a plan and a framework about how you're going to spend the money. And I do think for a while we were somewhat misunderstood with that, because Commissioner Savas and I had worked with finance as this passed to look through to see what the cash flow was and to really make sure, for the sake of the county, that the projections were coming through. And so we're really lucky that it's fulfilled its promise of that. But we did take, as you said, Commissioner, some heat for trying to be a little more cautious and make sure that we had you folks to help build the capacity as the money was coming in. So thank you for that. I think you guys do a fantastic job for us here in the county. And like I said, Commissioner Savas and I spent many months kind of getting some mud balls thrown at us for a while because we said, no, we did borrow 10 million, did we not? I think that we paid back. What did we borrow from?
We had up to 10 million
Up to 10
available.
million.
yeah.
We didn't borrow it all, I don't think.
No, we did not. And it's paid back now at this
Yep,
point,
yep,
isn't it? Yeah.
yep, we paid-
Yeah,
no,
so
we
we
borrowed,
did, we just knew that, judicious use of this money is long-term going to give you the better outcome. And people, if you rush these kinds of systems, it'll cause more problems than not. So thanks for the work.
Sure.
Okay. That's it.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, just to finish off what Commissioner Schrader was discussing, we asked for two loans, basically, one 5 and another 5. We didn't use the second 5. I think we used a portion of it. But the point of the matter is, for anyone watching, that staff had the resources available, but staffing up has been the challenge, right? So there was more available, even though, we didn't really know. We heard from this, well, not the CFO, but the Metro's auditor, that at the very beginning, that the revenue may not be coming in. So we were alerted by the Metro auditor himself, and we got documentation to that effect. And anyhow, we're in a better place, so all that behind us, we paid back the loan, so we're good there. I do want to, I appreciate the financial picture. I appreciate where we're at. I appreciate the plan that you've all structured here. And I'm in the mindset right now, okay, we got to get these dollars on the ground, right? And so what I don't have here, and I don't think you were asked to do this, but what would help me a little bit, help us all, I think, is understand in all these, whether they're priority areas or whether they're project-oriented or service-oriented, where in the pipeline, where are the bottlenecks, right? What do we need? So what do we need more than anything? Where's our weakest? I've always been wired that way to get to the most urgent needs. What is it we don't have right now that we need the most? Chair, if you may, I just want to just start with that question to staff, and then I want to be able to respond.
Well, two, we have some more priority areas to discuss. You've outlined where you want the money to go, but there's flexibility within that too, from what I understand in this plan.
There's flexibility built in. And Commissioner Savas, if we can, let's save that for the end, because I think it'll tee up a broader discussion. I mean, one of our bottlenecks or limitations is built infrastructure, for example, right? And we talk about capital at the end. Another is capacity building for community-based organizations, the wages of frontline workers, recruitment and retention. Some of that is built in here. So can we put a bookmark in that one and kind of come back to what we see as some of the bottlenecks to moving things forward quickly?
Sure. I see, I don't know where you want to go next, but I'll just hold my thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner Savas. I'd appreciate that. Commissioner West?
So looking at priority one, can you just, is it the 20% of the 44.2 million under the total SHS resources under the fiscal year 2021-22?
Yeah, so in the materials for today, you'll see the actual tax collections and forecasted tax collections here on page 2. So the 20%, if you look under the column 23-24 budget, across the forecasted tax collections line, 45.3 million, that's the new revenue we expect to get next year. Contingencies and reserves are generally pegged against that anticipated new revenue amount. So going forward. So yeah, I have a worksheet that takes us out, into year 27, 28 and the anticipated revenue amount. And I've calculated, okay, what are the reserves then at that anticipated revenue amount? Let's say when it gets to 70 million or something in the future, we would always year to year true up what we're holding in contingencies and reserves to peg it against that amount.
So we're always looking to have that 20% set aside based on the upcoming fiscal year's forecasted revenue.
Correct. And once you set it aside, Commissioner, so we're proposing to use these one-time resources to set it aside now. And then all we're doing in future years is topping it off, right? So then there's, to the extent that we don't draw it down, like let's say for the next 5 years we don't go into a recession, well, that just sits there for financial security, right? We make a conscious decision to draw it down if our actual revenue collection amount falls below the forecasted amount, and we need to tap into it to keep our programs running until the revenue recovers.
Yeah.
Okay, and if we don't need to add to it, we don't add to it. If it's already there, we don't need to top it off.
Well, we top it off based on the new anticipated collection amount,
And that's always slightly going, we expect it as of today to not fall off a cliff, but to slowly elevate over the next 8 years.
That's correct. In the last page of your packet, I've included the forecast amount going into the future, which you'll see, for 26, 27, for example, our forecasted revenue amount is 60.1 million. So, and it increases, 54, 60, 63. So each of those years, we're going to top off that nominal amount to align the 20% with the new revenue collection amount.
Okay, Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, so I'm going to get to one of my concerns that I had, that maybe this is the appropriate time. And I'm not going to necessarily say it's optics, but the way it reads as I look at this. And I understand maybe it's just the wording, but when it says priority area 1, financial stability, put the money here in contingencies and so forth. And, when we say that, and people that are watching this will say, well, actually, the priority right now is helping people on the street, right? So it's not the right terminology, right? It's kind of optics, but the way it reads that's more important than priority 2, which is more important than priority 3. And I just don't like that language.
Yeah, and that point is well taken, and actually, we had a tri-county meeting, and we had sort of a similar conversation. I'm a technocrat, so when I put materials like this together, I'm thinking, well, that comes off the top, right? That comes off the top of available resources. So my mind kind of goes to that first as a mathematical exercise, but you're right. In terms of our program priorities, That's not our number one program priority, right? Our number one program priority is ending homelessness and getting people off the streets and into stable housing. So your point is very well taken.
Okay. I would like to change the verbiage.
You got it.
Yep.
Plan for
Well, this
future
is a
growth.
priority for the money, for the allocation of the money. It's not necessarily a priority on where it's going to go. I mean, for instance, we have 5 priorities. Is this first or this second or this third is how you could do the priorities. Commissioner West and Commissioners, we need to move on because I suspect you'll want to talk more about the other priorities. Will take much more time. Please be brief, Commissioner West.
I kind of like that it's a priority because we don't help anybody if we don't manage if we're not good stewards of the money, and we're making the money stewardship number one priority. So we have more resources to help those that need. It's all interwoven together.
Okay, thank you. Can we go on to priority 2?
We sure can. So, priority area 2 is expanding capacity, and we're proposing $13.3 million for limited term investments in system development and capacity building, plus setting aside the required amount for the Regional Strategies Implementation Fund. Like contingency and stabilization reserves, the terms for the Regional Strategies Implementation Fund, which is a little bit of a mouthful, are outlined in the IGA. It says that not less than 5% of each year's funds must go towards regional investment strategies. We're proposing $4.3 million here to account for the 5% of the revenue that's come in to this point, a one-time resource. And then the remaining $9 million is planned for things like technical assistance and capacity building for community-based organizations, limited term expansion of front-end services to increase transitions into permanent housing, making a more responsive and effective coordinated housing access system, and facilitation and convening support for our restructured Homeless Services Advisory Body. I'm going to let Vahid go into a little bit more detail on the program.
Yeah, and very briefly, just the expanding capacity investments here, aside from the Regional Strategies Implementation Fund, have to do with, making sure that our provider partners in the community have what they need to do this work. So looking at workforce, at pay equity, those things that we've already been working on and making great progress on, but also ensuring that there's the organizational development infrastructure with very small nonprofits that are now in contracting with us for large budgets. Some of these small organizations need some support in maturing as organizations, becoming more robust with more fiscal controls, more administrative staff, right? So that's part of expanding that capacity for those organizations. The front-end services, what we're talking about here is the opportunity that these one-time dollars represent to accelerate the pace of moving people off of the streets. So we know that once we get to our goal of 1,065 households of people in permanent supportive housing, that's going to be what we have to, that's why that financial stability is so important. We're making a promise to those households and to the public that we're going to continue to support them in their new stable housing. That means a long-term commitment of rent assistance and case management, which is a bill that's going to come every year. And that bill is going to take up a larger and larger proportion of our budget in the last half of this measure. So it's financially prudent for us now to accelerate the movement to get us towards that goal faster, more people of those 1,065 are in permanent housing sooner, the more certainty we have about the bill that's coming. And we reduce homelessness more quickly in the community now, which I think is the urgency that we're all experiencing and feeling, and that our communities are asking us for. So that's really about expanding the pace of moving people off the street. So limited term duration and expanding our workforce, doing outreach and housing navigation, finding and identifying people in the community and moving them into permanent housing. We have had, under COVID, an underwater coordinated housing access system. It was developed to manage a very small pot of resources of homeless services programs that we had historically, and then came tens of millions of dollars of COVID for rent assistance. And we used our coordinated housing access system to manage that resource. It was not designed to manage tens of millions of dollars when we built it. We didn't have tens of millions of dollars. So it got behind, 6 weeks behind, right? So there's a limited term investment here to get ahead of that. And we already are on pace to do that, right? But the vision is that when you call CHA, Coordinated Housing Access, someone answers the phone and says, how can we help? As opposed to you call CHA, you leave a voicemail, and someone calls you 6 weeks later and says, you left us a voicemail saying that you were about to lose your housing. We might have missed the opportunity to help them. So this is about getting us ahead of that. And
I'll just add one thing, and that's not just 8 to 5, Monday through Thursday. We're working on after hours and weekend support so that people are getting real-time responses to what often is an in the moment crisis.
And similarly, our advisory structure that helps guide and inform our use and the way that we address homelessness in Clackamas County was built around a very small and limited resource pool, right? It was to help manage the $2 million historically of continuum of care federal dollars. We have outgrown that advisory structure, and we need a more robust, larger advisory structure with more representation from the community. I think that Commissioner Schrader has spoken about this over the years as a need. And these one-time funds will give us an opportunity to invest in a community partner that can convene our advisory structure and help us create that more robust system.
And part of that for me is also accountability for us as staff and the county to be held accountable for the goals that we've laid out and how we're using the funds. And if we've allocated funds in one area and we need to decrease them there and increase them in another area because our outcomes are showing that reallocation is the best thing to do, we want that guidance and feedback. And so that part of this investment is us trying to build that framework that can provide that level of scrutiny and accountability and guidance.
So you're looking at CBOs for some of this work?
Yes.
Vahid, you made mention you had fewer employees and now you have more. Would you like to give us that number?
Yeah, when we started the implementation and the planning for this work, it was sort of borrowing from Peter to pay Paul, right? So pulling staff from other programs like myself and 3 other staff in the county, someone who was a temp under COVID at the Housing Authority and 2 colleagues in Health, Housing, and Human Services, 4 of us. And now there's over 25 staff on the Housing Services team. So we have grown the team that has the capacity to do this work. We did not, as you all remember, I was quite haggard, I think, in the first year of this measure. Less so now, so feeling a little bit less pressed.
Yeah, 4 to 25, that's excellent. Thank you very much. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, while we're on this topic with CBOs and so forth and staffing, how does, or remind me the particulars regarding the cap on administrative cost?
So the cap on administrative costs is a little bit complicated in the measure. It's divided amongst different fund sources. So the Regional Long-Term Rent Assistance Program has a cap of 10% administrative costs for the counties in administering the Regional Long-Term Rent Assistance Program. Other housing services program have a recommended limit, not a cap, a recommended limit of 5% of administrative costs for the county in administering the programs. There is not an administrative cap that the measure requires the counties to pass down to CBOs. There are some recommendations about overall administrative costs by contracted services not exceeding 10%. That's the recommendation of the measure, but it isn't a hard limit.
Okay. So one other thing on the, and I go back to a town hall that we had way back during COVID time, and the CBOs commenting, and one of the complaints I heard voiced was, geez, it's a pain to fill out this paperwork. It wasn't about a monetary issue. It was about the actual exercise of doing all the things they're contracted to do, but they were responsible for these dollars, right? So I only say that as a entry point into where I'm going, and that is that, whether you're a nonprofit or whether you're a business, they don't all necessarily operate the same, necessarily even succeed, right? There's failures. So I would just want to make sure that I'll ask this question. Is it our job as a county to make sure that they run their operation correctly? As we front the money, which is where we're headed. We're headed towards fronting them some operational costs, which I understand the reason, so I don't have any heartburn about that. But does the administrative cost limit us in our ability to oversee and make sure that we got the receipts, that we're meeting all the procurement, the contracts, all the legalese, right?
Yeah, this one could have a policy session of its own, because how we fund and support administrative responsibilities it's a little bit complicated. But We're talking about this every day. Fahid and I were talking about it this morning with regard to invoicing business processes. And what level of supporting documentation are we requiring with any given invoice? You know, are we doing effectively a fiscal monitoring with every invoice? Or are we requiring less supporting documentation with each invoice, but then we're doing periodic, more in-depth monitoring? So we do have a responsibility, obviously, of fiscal stewardship, and they have a responsibility to adhere to, you know, generally accepted accounting principles. So I think what's changed over the last couple of years with the Metro measure is government trying to show up a little bit differently for nonprofits. You know, this isn't the world where nonprofits sort of exist independent of us in the community, and we're, you know, sprinkling little bits of money here and there to supplement programs that they're already delivering. This is different. We're asking the community to build a system of care, and we're relying on nonprofits to do that. So I think in that context, we have a greater responsibility to not put the onus on them to build the, you know, business services infrastructure, HR infrastructure, policies and procedures. We need to come to the table and say, okay, we can connect you with accounting firms that can help you build those fiscal practices and procedures. We can connect you with HR firms that can help you build, you know, your human resources infrastructure to effectively support your staff. So I think we're in a little bit of a different world, and I personally have tried to lead the charge in hearing, because I don't think we've done a good job of hearing the voices of some of the administrative staff at CBOs, their CFOs or their HR management. And so I've tried to be more attuned to their needs, because these are mission-driven organization, and oftentimes those voices have been drowned out by the program people just trying to get the next dollar out to the community. So there's a balance to strike here, and I think we're trying to find ways to show up differently.
I just want to, just to simplify it, I just want to make sure that that the administrative cost cap does not limit our ability to be robust enough to be good stewards of the dollars to do the tracking. That's where I'm getting at.
Yeah, and I think we have that flexibility.
Okay.
Great. Please continue on priority area number 2. Or maybe you're finished, I don't know.
I'm on 3.
We're done with that one. So the third priority area, upstream investments, we've planned $2.2 million for limited term pilot programs to close system gaps, address unmet needs, and test innovative system integrations. So this includes things like funding for community paramedics to help relieve some of the pressure on first responders related to the unmet physical and behavioral health needs of people living on the streets. It's continuation of the successful eviction prevention pilot program currently being administered by Resolution Services. There was a pilot program funded by the state through the University of Oregon through community mediation programs. That went to Resolution Services. It's highly successful. We want to continue that. It's a good use of money because it keeps people in the housing that they already have. And then self-sufficiency programs for money management and benefits enrollment and recovery, along with opportunities for improved partnerships with our cities. And I'm going to let Vahid go into more detail.
Yeah, I mean, some of the upstream investments highlighted here have to do, as Adam said, with, you know, making the best use of our resources by preventing people from returning to homelessness or becoming homeless in the first place. So that mediation program with landlords at Resolution Services is a great example of preventing homelessness. And the self-sufficiency programs that we would invest in pilot partnerships with community-based organizations help folks that we're serving now, people who are population A in the measure, folks who are disabled and have long histories of homelessness and are extremely low income. We are moving households like this into permanent housing, and that comes with a rent obligation on their part. Even though the Regional Long-Term Rent Assistance pays most of the rent, if that household has any income, 28% of that income must go to their rent payment. Mm-hmm. And managing that payment, that responsibility on a month-to-month basis for a disabled person, maybe with a severely persistent mental illness or an acute physical disability, someone who hasn't paid a bill in years, let's say, they've been living in a van or in the woods, that can be a barrier. And that is the most common reason that the folks that we're serving who have that level of acuity lose their housing. They get evicted because they didn't pay their $10 contribution to rent, because that's not something that they maybe have familiarity with. So these are programs that help people make that payment through a money management program. And the benefits recovery is very similar. Most of the population that we're serving are eligible for Social Security. These are disabled folks. they're not getting Social Security. It's very difficult to access it. There are excellent partners in the community who specialize in advocating, going to court, going to administrative hearings, and getting these folks the benefits they deserve. When those benefits come to those households, that money is money back to this resource, right? Because any of the households we're serving with rent assistance who now have income, some of that income is going to their rent. That means that our share of the rent goes down, our available pool of money to serve other people goes up. So every dollar we earn the household from a benefits recovery program is a dollar that comes back to the taxpayer.
On self-sufficiency, does that include job training for those who are able to work?
That would be in that same category, absolutely, yes.
Because somebody from severe mental illness may not have the capacity today for the job, or a disabled person may not have the capacity today, but there's people out there we're serving under this description.
Yep.
That can go to work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do we show them the path to job training, or how does that work? Or do we just find them a job because they have skills and maybe not able to utilize them?
I mean, we have partners with fantastic workforce development programs at Clackamas Workforce Partnerships and at Community Family and Community Connections. So we have partners ready in the wings to work with us on these kinds of programs.
Yeah, and that's something I think if public is listening to this, they need to understand that there is a huge accountability piece in this going forward. Commissioner West?
Here under examples for priority number 3, the upstream investment, I'm looking at this improved partnership of cities within Clackamas County. I've had a couple mayors say to me, hey, we might want to be partners, don't leave us out of the loop on this. We're here in the local communities too. But also it comes specifically to mind is like cities like Malala, rural cities that really lack the infrastructure and support necessary within those smaller communities. Is this where we kind of see funding going to potentially help alleviate some of those real pain points we have in the county right now?
So,
Or we can't because this is Metro dollars, right?
well,
Or-
yes and.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, explain
yes-
that. We've
yes
talked about
and.
this, but can
Yeah.
you explain that?
So correct, the Metro Measure funds have to be used within the urban growth boundary. However, we've articulated that two-pronged approach. We had resources that predated the Metro Measure, right? So we knew all along that with our Metro Measure implementation, that it would be a wise strategy to reposition those pre-existing resources to serve the rural areas. That work is underway, but it takes time. We have to, execute new contracts, fold in the SHS funds. We don't want to disrupt services while we do that. So all along, we've known that there's this repositioning strategy that needs to be carried out. And then the governor's emergency order and the legislature approved state funding, like our light bulb went on and said, okay, we need to prioritize these resources as well for the rural area, because that pre-existing money that we had before SHS wasn't enough on its own to solve all of the rural needs. So now the state EO money, we've told you we're prioritizing that for rural area investments, which we're moving on that now. And then if the state makes that funding ongoing, that will allow us to go much further in the rural areas. And to support this, Vahid had planned all along to do a rural area needs assessment to help inform that repositioning. Now, again, we can go further with the state funds. So we've initiated that discussion with the technical assistance provider to start that rural area needs assessment. We expect to execute that contract very soon. And then by the fall, we'll start getting that kind of preliminary feedback. But simultaneously, I'll let Vahid speak to how the cities will be involved in that process, but we can also have parallel conversations with them. So the needs assessment will inform this, but also our own conversations with the cities, including the rural cities, about how we can partner with them.
So we take the monies that we were using and the new monies coming in that aren't part of the SHS, it frees them up to be more diversified to the other parts of the county in those different vulnerable areas. But a city like Wilsonville can come up and say, if I'm talking to them, hey, we have this issue, or we're seeing this within our park, we need supports here. How can we collaborate within a more micro level within a city? This 2.2 million kind of allows for that local collaboration with like city, like Wilson, like, I don't know, whatever city within the urban growth boundary.
Yes.
Okay.
Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, so of the 4 bulleted examples you have there, I think I understand what those are, but I'm just trying to understand how the term there, the words, limited term pilot programs, what does that mean in context of your examples?
So by limited term, we're imagining some investments that span up to 3 years. So this is $58 million of one-time carryover funding. We've broken it out in these priority areas. Some of this, like some of the capital needs funding, might be spent within 1 year, but others we're imagining would be spread over multiple years, like up to 3 fiscal years. And as Adam mentioned, if we invest in a pilot with an innovative program and it's wildly successful, in year 3, 3 years out, if our baseline revenue is going up as it should, as it's projected to go up by a significant amount of funding, then that would be something that we would consider establishing as part of our ongoing investment. And so it would become an ongoing program. But the reason we pilot it is to test it, is to see what kind of results we get from it.
All right, I was just trying to understand, obviously it's not a limited term need because that'll be an ongoing need. All those are ongoing needs.
That's right.
But it's our way to solve the problem now with these one-time resources, continue it for a few years, keep an eye on it. If it's successful, then that becomes a priority for when our baseline revenue amount increases in the future.
Yeah, but doesn't that apply almost to everything we do, in essence, in general?
Well, there are things that are inherently one-time, like a capital investment or, or the technical assistance in capacity building, right? We expect that at some point, these organizations, they're going to be rocking. So there are things that are inherently one-time only, and then, there's things, even short-term rent assistance fits into that category. We need to keep an eye on that and potentially prioritize future resources for those things.
And there's also the dynamic I mentioned of, the goal we're looking towards is that most of the folks who are experiencing long-term homelessness in the community are now in permanent housing. So, and it's working, right? We've been talking about the point-in-time counts, a 49% decrease from 19 to 22, a 31% decrease from 22 to 23. We're spending more money every year, more services, more staff out there doing the work. Unless something catastrophic happens, that number is going to continue to trend that direction. That means that there's going to be fewer people experiencing unsheltered homelessness in the community. So while we're expanding and doubling down right now on that front-end programming of identifying people in the community through outreach, helping them find housing with navigation, we're staffed robustly for that right now to meet the needs that present today. Those needs hopefully will present differently in 2 years. We wouldn't necessarily need as many outreach and navigation providers at that time.
It's very positive thinking. Any more questions, commissioners? Do you want to talk about the improved partnership with cities? Or is that done?
Yeah, I think we're done there, but we're going to revisit it in the capital section as
Okay,
well.
good, because I'm thinking the 2.2 million allocated for this Area 3, it's not a whole lot left for cities, but you have another plan for that.
We do.
Yes.
Okay. All righty. Do you want to continue with Area 4?
Sure.
And please be more concise.
Yes.
And then leave more time for board questions, okay?
Will do. Okay. So, and the next two are really pretty quick. So the fourth priority area is for short-term rent assistance, where we planned to continue expanded rent assistance for 3 years at $5 million per year. This would have us setting aside $15 million. So historical context, we didn't have a lot of resources for short-term rent assistance. With COVID, we had, an influx of state and federal funding, one-time funds. Those resources are largely now exhausted, but there is a continued need for short-term rent assistance. So we think this is, a very sensible use of that funding. That's all I have to say on priority 4.
Okay, questions on this
One
one?
question on priority 4, Chair.
Yeah,
And
go
that
ahead,
is-
Paul.
And that's really on the program, not really the number 4 priority, but on the short-term rent, is there any, let's just say there's an able-bodied person who could work, have a job, is there any criteria that requires them to seek employment, for example? Or will they be relying on these systems in perpetuity?
Well, the short-term rent assistance is not a long-term commitment. It's meant to prevent a loss of housing. And so it's not a commitment by the county that we're going to provide a portion of rent assistance for the long term. Typically, it's some back rent. Someone has gotten behind on rent for a couple of months. They need assistance to get ahead of that and not get evicted. So it's eviction prevention. It's meant to really kind of be one and done, and hopefully we'll get this household past the crisis that happened. The car broke down. The spouse lost the job. It took a while to recover that income, whatever. So this is not a long-term commitment to households. So I think that
Right. I understand that, but
Yep.
knowing that it's short-term, whether it's 3 years or it's 2 years, but is there a requirement for them to seek so that when it stops, they're ready to stand on their own?
Yeah, I mean, it stops pretty much immediately. I mean, the 2 to 3 years is the 3-year commitment of the funding. We would be capacitating the rent assistance program at $5 million a year for 3 years. That's not 3 years of rent assistance. It's really typically one rent assistance payment. That's how short-term rent assistance typically works.
Okay, I didn't
It's
understand
a
that.
pool, it's a pool of resources to serve people that come in with that need.
Okay,
Okay.
that helps clarify, thank you.
Commissioner West?
My question is totally along the same lines. When we give somebody a check from the taxpayer to say, hey, we're going to get you through whatever mini crisis or major crisis you have going on, I'm a little bit curious about, like, what is that? It's like, is somebody say, oh, I just, lost my job and was a little bit fiscally irresponsible, and I put myself in my own bind, and now my mortgage payment's behind? And we come in, but we never help deal with underlying root causes? Or is it something like what you just described, Vahid? That's a different type of scenario. Who is available to receive the assistance? What is the criteria?
Yeah.
And I hope we're doing something that they don't have to ask for assistance again.
Right. So a couple of things there. This does not include mortgage payment assistance. So
Okay,
this is only rent assistance. There is a state program for mortgage assistance, and if someone is in that deep water, we refer them to the state program.
Okay.
There are requirements. So the households have to be at risk of experiencing homelessness as assessed by the criteria of the measure in order to be eligible to receive this. And not everyone who receives a notice that they're behind on their rent is at risk of experiencing homelessness. If they make 100% of the area median income and they just, kind of fell off the radar and didn't pay their rent for a few months, which happens, that's on them. If they're not a low-income household, they're not going to be eligible for this assistance, right? So, and in fact, the receiving of an eviction notice is not a great indicator of an upcoming experience of homelessness. It's counterintuitive, but the data says that most people figure it out. They turn to family, they turn to their networks. If you're about to get evicted, homelessness is not necessarily the next step for many households. It's counterintuitive. I probably shouldn't say that. It's a weird, wonky data point. But no, we assess the households for eligibility, and typically that's 50% of area median income or below. So these are already households that are making very little money. And they're holding it together. Some crisis occurred and they got an eviction notice. They weren't able to figure out how to put it together, and they are looking at homelessness if they don't do something. And this is a one-time payment to get them over that hump.
Do we tie to that a robust effort to help that person not be in that same situation, whatever that underlying cause is, which is, could be multifaceted, to be
Yeah.
frank, right?
Yep.
So how do we help them you are definitely flag an at-risk person, and we're not just gonna, here's your check, I'm glad your rent's paid, see ya. Like, what
Yep.
is that like? I guess wrap around to prevent this. Man, maybe it's a young man or a single mom, and they really do have a skill or want to go back to, maybe they can go to community college and get support that way as they go through school. And then, where are we elevating people beyond this cycle?
Yeah. Not typically with short-term rent assistance programs. Those programs don't typically come with case management, right? We do have a little bit of case management associated with our rent assistance programs because we do have very vulnerable people who come in and say, I think I need rent assistance one time, please help me. And we have case management that works with these households, identifies folks that it didn't work, right? This isn't going to be enough to prevent your homelessness. I need to refer you to a higher level of care. So we have folks that do that work in this program, staff that do that work. But what you're describing, Commissioner West, is a different program type that we do invest in called rapid rehousing, which is short-term rent assistance. It's 3 to 24 months. 24 months is 2 years. It's typically not that long. With that intensive wraparound case management to say, well, I'll help you with 60% of this rent payment this month. Next month, it's going to be 50. The month after that, it's going to be 40. Let's get ready for this. So what do we need? Come on, fam, let's get together. What do we need to do so that when it comes to 20%, you're in a good place? So that's that intensive case management. That's a rapid rehousing program. But most households that have a eviction crisis can get by with that one-time assistance. But if they can't, we have case managers there to sort of suss that out.
I would just think that generally, there is a series of events and personal choices and things outside someone's control. Perfect storm hits, right? But they're vulnerable if they're even ever at that point where we have to give them rent assistance, in my opinion. They're not just like you talked about the two different pieces of the transitional piece, a little longer and wrap around. I'm concerned that we're not also doing the prevention piece enough with this aspect here that we're talking about with the one-time help. That person's at risk for like a variety of issues and needs community support. So that would be my feedback on this. Is my perception is that we're missing an opportunity to be more preventive within this group.
Yeah, heard.
Okay. Anything else on rent assistance board, staff?
All right, so our last area here is capital needs, where we've set aside 16.8 million for capital investments in things like resource navigation, crisis stabilization, behavioral health, addictions and recovery, medical respite care, and transitional housing for that care, recovery-oriented transitional housing, emergency shelter, and grants or partnership opportunities to build geographically distributed service access points through city-led initiatives. Again, partnerships with our cities.
Good. And I think, Commissioners, we have some projects identified in this example, but we're not discussing those particularly today, correct?
Yeah, I think we can show the board a path to formal processes to allocate resources based on the priorities that we've outlined here, and we're happy to support that discussion going forward.
So Chair, is now the time, or Adam?
Whatever you want, we have time.
Okay, is now the time for that, my first question?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah. So Commissioner, what more, sorry, you asked about bottlenecks, right?
Well, yeah, what are the most urgent needs of the gaps, right, that we need? Where are we not, so we have resources, right? So, I mean, we ought to be very strategic, right?
Yeah.
So what are those?
Yeah, well, I think they're outlined in the capital needs bullets. So mental health and addiction recovery services for folks experiencing homelessness is a critical gap that remains the case. Our behavioral health system is drastically under-resourced historically in the state of Oregon. Safety off the streets, emergency shelter, that's a critical gap, right? So we still have folks who are passing away while experiencing unsheltered homelessness in Clackamas County. In numbers that are not acceptable to any of us, and so that's a consequence of us not being able to offer adequate access to safety off the streets in the moment right now. And then the workforce really is the urgent need. That's a general statement, but to be more specific, right? We have historically not valued the professional career of doing the work of assisting people to end their homelessness. It's often paid at entry-level salaries, right? This kind of case management work. It's very difficult work. It requires a huge heart and a lot of compassion and people skills and the ability to solve problems with folks who are in crisis and experiencing all kinds of anxiety and trauma and are often very sick. So it's as difficult as working in an emergency room, but historically we haven't paid the workforce or honored or valued that as a calling to be of a career and a professional career. We haven't paid it as a professional career. So that's an urgent need, and we've made great progress in Clackamas County on adequately paying the workforce that's doing this important work. But that has been the challenge up to now in terms of the bottleneck or the urgent need when we look at the trend line of the spending, why isn't it here and why is it here and not here? It's because of the workforce. And we knew that already. We've known that for a while, and we've been taking steps to address that. And we've been growing our programs and giving our providers the ability to hire more people with certainty that they're going to have applicants of quality. But 18 months ago, that wasn't the case, right? We were hearing from providers, and I was saying, I want to give you a contract to do a whole lot more work. And they'd say, I would love to, but no, I can't hire anybody. I tried for 4 months and no one applied that I could even interview. So we're in a different place now, but we haven't solved that problem entirely. So there's more work to be done there. Those are just a few things off the top of my head.
Right, so you have 7 bullets there, if I was
Yep.
to throw a dart, I mean, we're not going to do that, right?
Yeah.
But, if you were to rank them, for example, I mean, some of those, I agree,
Yeah.
our workforce issues, we've been fighting that, we're all fighting that. But for example, the third bullet, behavioral health and addictions recovery, I assume that might be structural as well as personnel, right?
Yes.
So what's the first step, knowing that, I mean, where do we need to start first? Because that could be, if it's structural, need to build something or find something that's already built, and staffing, you got to get the ball rolling. So I'm using my implementation
Yeah.
mindset here
Yep.
as an implementer, and knowing how to prioritize these things, that we have these urgent needs, how would we rank these things? That's where I'm getting at with the bottleneck. Where do we go first?
So I think these are all critical needs. And so we do need to do some prioritization. How much money do we want to put in each bucket for capital investments? Once we decide that, prioritize, decide how much should go in each bucket, then we can solicit proposals from the community for partnerships. That could be cities, that could be CBOs, right? Mary was here talking about a contract with Recovery Work Northwest yesterday for, medically assisted detox, right? Do we want to go to the community and say, hey, we can put forward a capital investment of $2, $3, $4 million to invest in the kind of built infrastructure that you need to expand the programming into Clackamas County. So I think those are the steps: prioritizing, allocating resources across the categories, and then us working to solicit proposals from the community for investments, and then selecting and moving them along. And that can include cities too.
Of course, yeah. So, I mean, we hear a lot, we talk a lot, and so one thing that's top of mind to me, that we know that not just here, but across the state, addiction recovery, drug alcohol addiction recovery centers and the staffing, right, obviously, is a huge gap, right?
Yep.
So, knowing that it takes a long time to stand something up, I mean, just the Veterans Village took a long time to stand up, not related to those, but it takes a long time. So I just want to see how we get the ball rolling. What can we do other than, make it our own priority, but it's a known priority, right? So I just wondered what we can do here today to make something happen.
Yeah, I love the way that you're thinking, Commissioner Sabbas, and that's music to my ears. I think that if the board likes this framework of priority areas, and we want to move with urgency on identifying some priorities and some next steps, so I think that staff can do that under Category 5 and come back with those kind of options, because yes, it takes time, but there are providers of these services in our community. Some of them we already work with now. Some of them we don't as Health, Housing, and Human Services. But I know that they are providing these services in the community. If we were to put a solicitation out, they would respond. And some of these are very nimble organizations that have a really pretty cool business model where they buy a property, set it up as a group home for folks in recovery, and get it going, right? It's a well-oiled machine. If we had some funding available for them, they could expand their programming in Clackamas County. I feel confident in that right now as I say that. But again, we'd have to do the solicitation. But I think that these are the areas, right? These are the things that we need. I want to highlight also that we didn't really mention it much, but medical respite care. Many of our folks experiencing homelessness are, as you know, Commissioner West, when you visited with Loved One, very, very sick, very ill people, and they're being discharged from the hospital with cancer and heart disease and brain trauma to a tent. And the skilled nursing facilities won't take them because they're homeless. And the skilled nursing facility says, we're by law not allowed to discharge them unless they have a safe place to be discharged, so we won't take them in the first place. It's a terrible catch-22 that is catching these folks experiencing homelessness in basically a death sentence, to be frank. So there's a need for that. That's expensive programming. We have a grant that we're applying for from Kaiser to do some planning work around medical respite care in the county. If we get it, and this is a priority area for capital investment, again, That's an opportunity for a solicitation or even a pilot program.
Okay, so I don't disagree with a lot of what you all said, and I can see that putting a contract out, RFP out for a number of these things and using an you're externalizing it, right?
Yeah.
And that might be the best way to respond, but is there something that we can do internally where we're not externalizing it, we're doing it internally to make it happen faster, have it more secure? And when I think of structures, I think of not a lot of people are going to want to just respond to an RFP, build a structure, or find a structure and do all of that stuff, right? That's a big task. Is it not faster for us to do it ourselves?
Well, we have the ability to do this ourselves, right? We acquire assets all the time. And so if there are existing assets that we know of that we could put into use in this way, or if the county wants to do a search for physical assets in parallel with something like this and then find a service provider to run the site down the road, or partner, public-private partnership on the, rehab of a facility that the county identifies, maybe we pass it off for ongoing physical asset management to that service provider going forward. But yeah, there's nothing stopping us as a county from using our infrastructure to do that as well.
Right. Well, just full disclosure to my colleagues, I do have because there is something that I think a number of us, and not all of us, agree on 100%. As we see, I think we see as a gap. So I've got a motion prepared, but I know
Well,
there's
just
a
a
motion
moment.
that needs to happen first. So
Well-
this would be on top of that.
Okay, so just a moment, Commissioner Savas. This is a well-oiled presentation that's been brought for us today, and there's some motions on page 4 that I think we need to look at. And I've seen some of the spending programs, and you all probably have seen that too, of programs and issues that we've all discussed. And there's something on this for everyone, okay? Because the nature of confidentiality, I understand, that's the reason why they're not listed here today. And so I think as this comes forward, it's why it's being presented the way it is. Also, Vahid, you're still hiring, right? You're still
Yes.
hiring. You're not done hiring. Okay.
Correct.
Also, there's another issue when it comes to the workforce, and that's pay equity. And I've been addressing this, and you have been addressing this, back in February when we realized that some of these contracts from our nonprofits couldn't be offered because they were concerned about the pay equity. We couldn't necessarily, or other jurisdictions couldn't necessarily pay people more. And I went to the governor and I says, look, Governor, there's a pay equity issue here. She says, you're kidding. I says, no, because of the law, we can't pay more for this group over here than this group. And she says, oh my gosh, because you remember as Speaker of the House, she put that through. She says, I had no idea. I says, well, why don't you, through your emergency declaration, just say, you can pay what you want. She says, verbally, she says, absolutely, of course, pay more. Do what necessary to get this out the door. And Vahid, you're doing that on the pay equity. And we have a tri-county planning body meeting this afternoon, and you're going to present from Clackamas County what we're doing about the pay equity issue, and I think it'd be well received. Multnomah County has their issue that they're going to present, and Washington County has their issue too. But I'm going to be really mindful of any motions that come over that specifically go like this. But I'll listen to what you have to say, Commissioner Savas.
Sure.
Commissioner West, you're up.
Yeah, Chair, thanks for that. My questions are along what Chair Smith just brought up. That was some of my concern, is understanding, maybe with good intentions, to try to be fair, that we're now inhibiting ourselves from being nimble and attracting talent and people based on their merit and valuing them based on the things they can bring to the table and their talents, and pigeonholing our ability to recruit them or under the disguise of pay, or under this rule of pay equity. So am I correct to say, if it's a like position is just within Clackamas County, we have to give everybody the rate? And how does that, can you explain, can you dive in a little bit deeper into what we're talking about with what Chair Smith just said? Because I think, where can we get around that? Are we around that now? Did the governor actually change in her executive order this issue? Yeah, can you bring us up to speed?
Yeah.
There's couple really important pieces. So the SHS measure is a luxury for our system to the extent that it gives us resources that we just didn't have before, flexible resources to try to address things like this. But regionally, there are tens of millions of dollars of programs and services that preceded the SHS measure, right? So take a big organization that had a budget of $20 million and 100 employees. And now we're asking them to double to 40 million and add 100 more employees. And we're saying, just hire the 100 employees. We can pay them $30 an hour now. And they say, well, but hold on. We have $20 million of pre-existing programs and services and 100 employees that we don't have the ability to just pay more, because our other funders, state funders, federal funders, et cetera, aren't just going to up our allocations because we need to pay people more. So there's a structural tension here with that, all of the pre-existing investments. So that one we haven't quite solved for yet, because if that's $20 million in programming, and 100 employees, well, maybe you can raise wages, but then you can only afford 70 of those employees or something. And then are we going to accept less outcomes from that $20 million investment because we've had to reduce the workforce to 70 people and now they can't manage as many cases? So that one we haven't quite solved for. I'll let Vahid go into some of the other challenges.
I mean, that's it. That is the challenge. It presents itself more with larger organizations, is the example that Adam gave, an organization that has a large pre-existing workforce that has classifications of work, similar work, that they've established a rate of pay based on their federal or state funding for that classification. Maybe it's a case manager 1, and I'm asking them to do this work, and they have that classification. I'm saying I'm looking for a higher rate of compensation so that you can actually hire people. And they are, under the pay equity law, they are unable to offer a higher rate of pay for the same classification that's not based on experience or other qualifications, right? So just because the fund source says we'll pay more for that hourly for that classification of work than this fund source, that doesn't get us past the law. So this large organization, what has happened in some of our experiences is I have been in conversations with the organizations in contract negotiations and said, I'm scrutinizing your rate of compensation. It looks too low. We would like you to increase it in your budget and resubmit your budget. And sometimes I've had the experience where agencies have said we can't because of the example that Adam provided. And in those instances, I've said, well, I need you to go back and work on it, and I'm going to reallocate the funding because this is really important that we expand our workforce immediately, and I'm going to work with an organization that has the ability to do that.
What's funny is that this outcome was really foreseen through the legislative process, but we have the law that we have now. This was the objections that were made when we were going through this process, and probably a legislative fix. So we can't say, and I believe that the people that are working under this other funding source are chronically underpaid, right? Like, I know this population of staff, they are doing the Lord's work and they don't get paid enough money. It's very apparent. And so there's no free market pressures now, or there's no market pressures to allow for the increase of wages to happen when we have the need right now. I'd like them all to be paid more. We can't use some of these dollars to help supplement other similar work and then still pay our people more. Like, I mean, or do we have to get the governor to maybe do an executive order and go around I don't know what this problem is here, but I don't know if we can do this without solving it.
Yeah,
we are
doing it. I mean,
we're doing it, and Vahid, he's doing a great job when he sees these contract budgets. And when I talked about government showing up differently, I can assure you this did not happen historically, where we look at their wage structure and we say, we know you are not going to be able to recruit and retain the workforce that we need and provide the continuity in the provision of services that our system needs with that wage structure. Let's go back to the drawing board. That's new. So with regard to the market forces, maybe economists and others will look back on this 20 years from now and examine it, but we're seeing the market forces play out in real time, and the story isn't over yet, right? We're still figuring out how to make it work.
Can we tweak our description? Can we tweak what the qualifications we are just enough so we can pay these people and get them off the ground?
Yes, that's what one agency did, and they were able to come back to the table and say, we'll try again with the contract. We've tweaked yes, that's one thing. Another outcome, when I had one agency that had a very low wage structure, I said, I'm sorry, this isn't going to work for us. I'm going to reallocate the funding. They went back to their board of their nonprofit. They made the decision to raise their wages across the board as an agency, and they came back and said, we fixed it. We had this structural problem. We decided to bite the bullet and pay everyone in our agency more so that we could raise our pay structure. Can we try again at a contract? And I said, yes, absolutely.
Okay. Well, cool. It's complicated. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Commissioner Shaw.
Yes, thank you, Vahid and Adam. The question right now is, do the 5 priorities and the allocations of the $58.6 million you have briefed this morning set the conditions to maximize the use of the $43 million that you project will come in from the Supportive Housing Services funds in FY 23-24 and in 24-25 and so on? That's the question right now. And the question.
Can I respond to that one just quickly, Commissioner? That is our whole orientation
Yes,
to these investments. Is how can we use the one-time resources to optimize the ongoing system framework that we have?
That's exactly where I'm going. So this meeting we're having here right now is to assess your allocation of the $58.6 million to set the conditions to maximize future investment in our homelessness and housing issues to alleviate suffering, eliminate future suffering, okay? So I had your briefing yesterday. I've looked at the 5 priorities. I trust Vahid Brown and Adam Brown and your intimacy with the built infrastructure, the partners out there, the programs, so that your recommendation today is in fact going to set the conditions to maximize our investment each year so that we can truly say that Clackamas County Supportive Housing Services is going to be maximum effective. So this morning I support your recommendation for option 1.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner.
On option 1?
Yes.
Excuse me, for a motion on option 1. Are you making that motion?
I can do it if you like.
I'm fine.
I think I heard that.
I move to approve the plan and priorities for making one-time and limited-term investments in services and infrastructure for homeless and housing as presented today.
Second.
Commissioner Scholl has made a motion to approve option 1 as presented. Commissioner Schrader has seconded the motion. Commissioner Savas, you had a light on.
I'll hold that till after the motion.
Are you okay with the motion,
Yep,
Commissioner
I am.
Savas, because you had another idea?
Yep.
Okay,
That's all
good. I
fine.
want to make sure everybody's okay. Are we clear on the motion?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the presentation. And Commissioners, you all were very good on your additions and questions. Tony, can you call the poll, please?
Commissioner West,
Aye.
Commissioner Savas,
Aye.
Commissioner Schrader,
Aye.
Commissioner Shaw,
Aye.
Chair Smith.
Aye, motion passes 5-0. Thank you very much. Commissioner Savas, you have a comment.
Yeah, I'm going to make a motion, and let's just see how it goes, just for sake of time. I move to direct the administrator to have H3S staff prioritize creating a drug and alcohol recovery facility in alignment with the framework just approved, including developing initial project plans, drafting RFPs, and other preliminary work, and returning to the BCC by December 1st for a report.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Savas, do you have something, a motion has been made by Commissioner Savas to prioritize a drug recovery center? Is that what I heard?
That's correct, and it's consistent with the priority area 5.
Priority area 5.
It's consistent with, actually, it's consistent with everything here, frankly.
Commissioner West has seconded that motion, and I'm going to go back to priority area 5. So if we do that, Commissioners, that means the Crisis Stabilization Center that is ready to go, and you know what that is? That's the sheriff's facility at $2.5 million. She asked for $1 million, $2.5 million gets to go out the door on that, but maybe you haven't seen the list on that. That will not be a priority, and there's an additional $1.5 million for program development, correct, Vahid? So I caution you to do this.
Chair,
I'm speaking, Commissioner Savas, and you can have your moment. I'm speaking to the motion. What I'm saying is, if we prioritize the recovery center first, some of these other programs on this list may not be ready, may not have the attention. But I disagree with that. I think that we're capable of doing many things at the same time. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time. I'm not sure what you have in mind with that going forward, but if you want to be more specific in your motion, do you have some type of recovery center in mind to do that?
well, I think I'm going to give staff the latitude to interpret that. And the words I used in the motion was drug and alcohol recovery facility, consistent with bullet number 3, for example, and other aspects of what we discussed here today. And there's substantial resources available to do that.
Okay.
It's just a matter of moving, and I think we all agree, I can't speak for all
Are
of
we
you,
in
but,
discussion on the motion right
We're in
now?
discussion on the
Okay.
motion, just a moment, yes.
yeah, so
Yeah.
I'll just stop there.
Okay, and then I'm going to ask staff what they think about that. But I believe Commissioner Scholl, you're up next.
Yes, thank you. As we looked at the discussion today, it's obvious that there are many, many details that will be considered to implement the large array of projects that we need to do to meet our supportive housing goals. And I believe that all of those issues should be looked at in a holistic sort of approach. I agree with the importance of the facility that Commissioner Savas is speaking about this morning, but I don't think it should be looked at in isolation. And that's my take on this issue this morning.
Thank you, Commissioner West, and then Commissioner Schrader.
So I appreciate my colleague, Commissioner Savas, and I provided a second so we could have this discussion.
Just a moment. Commissioners, according to Robert Rules of Order, we can have any discussion without providing a second to a motion. I just want to caution all of us on that. We do not make seconds for the purpose of discussion. If you want to discuss this, you can discuss it. Just letting you know, but go ahead.
Yeah, and I would just say, Chair, if I didn't give a second, then it would die for fail of a second, and we wouldn't be having this conversation.
I disagree with you.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Regardless, I think it's an important conversation to have. There has been a lot of conversation amongst all of us commissioners regarding potentially doing this for a little while now, more than just a week or so, like a couple months. A lot of conversations have been happening. At a certain point, I do think it's important that we start to talk about it even more openly and publicly. I wasn't aware that this motion was coming. It's something that I've been very open and passionate about. I've spoke to both of you gentlemen about this, and to most of my colleagues, if not all of them. I think it's essential that we really start to look at a recovery center or campus and how it fits within this plan. I feel like I can see shadows of it or or something kind of hearkening to potentially that in the future. I don't see it in this plan. I also don't, I'm a little bit torn here, Commissioner Savas, because I don't understand. I know timing's essential as we roll things out.
Okay,
And
just,
you-
I'm really sorry. A commissioner has to leave. There's a motion on the table that needs to be voted on. Commissioner West, I'm going to ask if you hold that thought and let Commissioner Schrader speak.
Colleagues, I have to run a CEWD meeting right now in like 3 minutes, so I am going to have to leave. I would abstain from this motion, and the reason I would abstain is because I think it's a great idea. We're going to be looking at it, but let's look at it right now, okay, in the fuller context of what staff has presented to us before we get so directive.
Okay, before she goes, I'm going to call for a vote. Commissioner Schrader, I'm going to call for a vote. Tony, go ahead.
Chair, I got to make one comment to clarify two things. One, what Commissioner Scholl said and what Commissioner Schrader said. So I'm
Commissioner,
going to reread the
stop.
motion. I'm going to reread the motion because I want to make sure you understand. So it's not,
Point of order. The chair was calling for a point of order. We have a commissioner that must leave. All of you have had to leave for meetings. I'm going to allow a vote before Commissioner Schrader leaves, and we can come back and consider something else. Tony, call the poll.
Well, hold on.
Call the poll.
Commissioner Schrader.
Abstain. I'll be back.
Commissioner Scholl.
No.
Commissioner West.
Yes.
Commissioner Savas.
yes.
Chair Smith.
I will abstain also. Motion fails. 2-1, correct?
Chair, point of order.
Just a moment. Would you please allow me to conduct this meeting did I state that properly? Is it 2-1-2? Thank you, 2-1-2. Commissioner Savas, you have the floor.
My comment would have taken less time than.
I know, but
than-
she was out the door.
I understand that. My motion would have taken less time than the time we actually incurred by having the dialogue, and that was that rereading the motion would have given more clarity and the vote would have been more accurate. It would address Commissioner Scholl's concern and Commissioner Schrader's concern. And I'll just restate it. So Commissioner Scholl, you made the concern that, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, that your concern was that it would nullify perhaps all the other priorities, right? And it would.
No.
Okay. Could you help
No,
me
my
understand
concern
your-
was that this morning, the briefing this morning looked at our priorities for setting the conditions to be successful in coming years. And although I'm very concerned also about putting together a recovery center idea, I don't think this morning, I'm not ready to vote on that this morning. I want to have a better look at our big picture and more time to consider the details that might be involved in the planning of the recovery center idea.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that clarification. And Commissioner Schrader's concern was that it may not have been in alignment with what was presented here today. And so I want to restate the motion, which really, I think it answers all of that, even yours, Commissioner Scholl. And the motion was to move the direct administrator to have H3S staff prioritize creating a drug and alcohol recovery facility in alignment with the framework just approved, including developing initial project plans, drafting RFPs and other preliminary work, and returning to the BCC by December 1st for a report. So it would have been consistent with everything presented here today, not inconsistent.
I'm going to just jump in. I'm not going to use my light. When a commissioner has the floor and we're talking about a specific motion, I don't appreciate being interrupted in a way that doesn't allow me to come back to my original statements.
We'll get over it, Commissioner West, because I run the meetings for time. A commissioner had to leave. I understand we're all emotionally involved in this. We did some hugely important work today. You may have all the time you need right now to finish what you need to say.
It was to the motion, which is now no longer relevant or something we're discussing. But I think per Robert's Rules of Orders, I was within my right. I had the floor. We have 5 commissioners, so if one has to leave, we can still make the vote or we can table something. There was no need to rush the vote. And at that point, I had every right to come back or finish my statement and to get better understanding about the motion on the floor.
And Chair, when I state point of order, that's to actually correct or rectify or just remedy the process in which it's out of line with Robert's Rules of Orders to Commissioner West's point. So a
Okay.
point of order does take priority.
I had a point of order also. I had a point of order before you had a point of order.
Did you state your point of order?
I did state my point of order. I believe I stated my point of order was a commissioner had to leave, and that was very important.
That's not a point of order, though. That's not a point of order. Point of order is process-oriented.
Well, the process, voting is process. So if you don't
Sure.
have one of the commissioners here to vote, then,
But point of
That's part
order,
of the
point of
process.
order is to Robert's Rules procedures. It's not to circumstances at the moment.
well, I would disagree with that. Any other comments on this? Staff, I would like you to comment on the acceleration of the Recovery Center for Drug Addiction and Alcohol, of which we all want. What are your thoughts on that?
Chair, I think we're happy to take the board's direction and prioritize investments however you all see fit. We can bring you a prioritized list. We can help you understand the resources that we have available in more detail. Also, what we know about the current pace of collections and the preliminary information from Metro about the pace of those collections is that we're likely to have revenue this year in excess of the forecasted amount, and it will only allow us to go farther. So our goal today was to establish a framework that sets up the opportunity to go farther if additional resources come available. So we don't see a rush to the conversation necessarily. We saw this as setting up subsequent conversations, and so we're happy to come back as needed and support you achieving your goals in whatever way we can.
And that list on priority number 5, that's quite a list. And I do believe that there's recovery on that as well. I'm concerned. The reason why I abstained from the initial vote was because I am concerned that I think you have a plan in place based upon feedback from all the commissioners here, based upon feedback from the community of what needs to be done. I am confident that you can do that. You will come back, I'm sure, through the process as funding goes out the door, correct, Gary?
Yes.
And we'll be approving things on the consent agenda. We'll have more discussions of that. I think recovery looks like many different things. And I can see from the list that recovery is here and here and here. If we're trying to build a huge, huge recovery center, now that's another question. I think that bears more consideration and more resources, which we can have. Commissioner Savas, if you want to have that question, that's totally fine. Commissioner Scholl?
Yes, thank you. You know, one thing that's coming up soon is the Blue Ribbon Panel on homelessness. That panel should shed some light on some ideas, options, capabilities that's available to us for this recovery center idea. After that, after we receive the input from the Blue Ribbon Panel, then I think Commissioner Savas's motion today would be very well received.
And I would agree with that, Commissioner Scholl. I'm not saying I don't want to do that. I just think today is not the proper time. Gary, your comment?
Today, Commissioners, you just approved a funding framework. Every penny will still need to be approved by you at future policy sessions and consent agendas, and especially priority number 5, capital needs team. We always got to come back to the board and get their guidance and firm direction on how to spend those monies within that money. Certainly, even though the motion failed, staff is going to work on this. It's one of the many priorities. We'll come back to you on what you'd like to prioritize within that. Thank you.
And Commissioner Scholl makes a good point. We established a Blue Ribbon Commission to look especially like this. Why would we get ahead of what we've asked somebody else to give us information on, too? But I'm open-minded to this going forward. I appreciate all the conversation on this. Commissioner Savas?
Yeah, just to address a couple of things. So first of all, certainly there's a lot of detail on anything that we do, and this is a high-level motion. It was put the opportunity for staff to guide and shape that. And of course, they'll come back to us, had the motion passed, they would come back to us and, through processes in the next 6 months, and they would have done just what they would do and do well. This was really saying this is a priority for the county and the commission, and it would have gave the direction. I don't see how it would in any way conflict with any of the blue ribbon work of the Blue Ribbon Committee, and staff has already identified it as a gap.
Thank you. Any further comment from anybody?
Chair Smith, I just want to thank Vahid Brown and Adam Brown for your work today.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Yeah, I also want to thank you all for the work you did at the C4 retreat. Good job.
Thank you.
C4 retreat, and especially this packet of information. I know it's been a long time coming. We finally have enough money to do what we need to do going forward. Very well thought out. I'm very happy about it, and that we have opportunities for a lot of success. I want to thank you for that very much. See no further business before this board. We are adjourned.